Well, I first of all want to thank you for joining us today for the first ever Misconceptions of the Mind conference, MoMiCon 2016. I'm Tania Lombrozo. I'm a psychology professor here at UC Berkeley, and I've co-organized today's event along with June Gruber, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Colorado Boulder. And it's our pleasure to welcome you to UC Berkeley's Social Science Matrix, the space we're in today, to learn about some misconceptions of the mind, as well as to engage in a best practice model for how to run workshop-style conferences that can more easily accommodate academic mothers with young children. I'll begin with a brief overview of the conference and its aims. At a broad level, MoMiCon is designed to accommodate conference speakers who are academic mothers within the psychological sciences. But our hope in focusing on this relatively small group is to start a much broader conversation about how academic norms and institutions can change to better accommodate scholars with different needs throughout their academic careers, therefore reducing barriers to excellence and scholarship and facilitating academic outreach. We have both broad and more specific motivations that served as an impetus for this particular vision for today's event. At a general level, we know that there are growing numbers of women with PhDs in psychology moving on to careers in academia. Yet despite these growing numbers, a number of persistent gender differences remain. Here's just one example having to do with median annual salaries for both men and women employed as full-time scientists and engineers. This is one example of many. Academic women with young children face several challenges that may contribute to some of these gender gaps. And some of these, of course not all of them, but some of them are related to conference and travel more generally. So for instance, it can be quite difficult to make arrangements that allow a mother to leave her children at home while she travels to a conference, but taking children with you when you travel has its own set of unique challenges. In turn, failing to travel can have substantial professional costs. It limits the effective dissemination of research, it limits opportunities for networking and for collaboration, and it reduces one's visibility in the field more generally. We also have a more personal motivation for pursuing this particular event. This is an experience that I shared with my co-organizer, June Gruber. We were both invited to speak at a conference that we were very excited to attend, but at the time, we had nursing babies. And it quickly became apparent that the venue for this conference was just not going to accommodate this very effectively. Now, this is just one manifestation of a much more widespread conflict that many academic women face. It's a conflict between, on the one hand, their identities as a scholar and as a scientist, and on the other hand, their identities as a parent. So we decided to organize MoMiCon 2016 as a model for how a conference could accommodate mothers with young children, in part to help spark this broader conversation about how to make academic life more inclusive to the multiple identities that we all have. These motivations led to two parallel aims for today's conference. The first is to foster scientific dialogue. Today we bring together a methodologically and thematically diverse set of presentations that challenge common or intuitive misconceptions about the mind. These presentations showcase the kinds of insights that are emerging from the psychological sciences today, and they're designed to be of interest to both specialists and also a more general audience. A second aim is to model some best practices for how to run a conference of this type that better accommodates women with young children. Though I should really amend this to better practices, because we don't pretend to have figured out the best way to do this, and we didn't really succeed in accomplishing everything that we would have liked. So really what we hope to do is to spark this broader conversation with you, with others in academia, with the broader public, about how we can do things better together. And supporting both of these aims, we're going to make the content of today's presentations available to the public. They're going to be available at momicon.org, which I encourage you to visit, as well as on UC Berkeley's YouTube channel. So let me hand things over to June, who will tell you a bit about the accommodations and schedule for today's event.
So this conference really aims to provide several specific accommodations for participants with young children, and I'll walk through them today. So looking at accommodations, there's kind of four broad domains of accommodations that we put together for this event. The first is really to do with timing. And so one of the things we tried to do was make the timing realistic and make the timing feasible. So we have regular 30-minute conference breaks for pumping or feeding of children, extended 90-minute lunch break for speakers and children or their caregivers, and starting the talks by 9 and ending by 4:30 as well. Second, and this was one of the biggest hurdles that we faced, was finding accessible facilities. So in particular, the social science matrix is really wonderful for today because it has, as you saw, upstairs some wonderful on-site facilities for children and caretakers to watch children during talks. There's a lactation room, a play area, and it's also a stroller accessible conference venue as well. Third is just this notion of inclusiveness, right? Which is, again, one of the barriers that many women face when they attend conferences, is having sort of a sense of inclusive activities for them and their caregivers and children. So we have a welcome reception and breaks that are open to speakers, partners, caregivers, and children, as well as child-friendly inclusive activities on site, one of them happening right now, as a matter of fact, the participatory music class in the morning and a family-friendly optional dinner in the evening. And then finally is just the financial burdens that can make it really difficult to accommodate conferences with children. So we have financial assistance in the form of conference travel costs to help defray expenses for invited speakers, their children, and one guest with childcare responsibilities. So those are, again, some of the 4 broad domains that we hope to cover. And again, we hope to spark conversation about what are other things we can continue to do to make these kinds of events more and more accessible and accommodating. And what I'll do then at the end is just give an overview of our schedule for the day. So here's sort of a big picture of the roadmap of what we're going to be doing today. Again, starting with the welcoming remarks at 9 a.m. and concluding with a closing Q&A by 4:30. And I'll go through each component right now, which is incredibly exciting what we have lined up for you today. So first, we have our keynote address by Dr. Alison Gopnik, a professor at UC Berkeley, on the parenting misconception, or why is parenting a scientifically inaccurate and practically dubious way to understand the relations between children and the people who care for them. Then we'll transition to our first of 3 sessions. This is session A, where we're going to have 2 talks on the cognitive misconceptions of the mind. The first is by my co-organizer, Tania Lombrozo, a professor at UC Berkeley, who's going to speak with us about how learning isn't just about getting the right information. She'll be followed by Dr. Linda Wilbrecht, also at UC Berkeley, whose talk is entitled, "Teenagers Are Not Lacking Their Frontal Lobes." This is one of our first 30-minute breaks that I mentioned, beginning at 10:45, with refreshments for speakers, attendees, caregivers, and children. We'll then move to session B, where we have 2 talks by leading social psychologists talking about social misconceptions of the mind. We'll start with Dr. Abigail Marsh from Georgetown University, sharing with us her thoughts and research, cutting-edge research on how human nature is not fundamentally selfish. She'll be followed by Dr. Marjorie Rhodes at NYU, who's going to speak with us about some scientific insights supporting the claim that we're not born racist. We'll then have a 90-minute lunch break. This is restricted to invited participants, as well as providing lunch recommendations for all registered attendees today. After our lunch break, we'll have our second keynote speaker by Dr. Mary Ann Mason, professor and co-director of the Center for Economics and Family Security at UC Berkeley, on Do Babies Matter? Gender and Family in the Ivory Tower. This will be followed by our second 30-minute afternoon break. So again, we're trying to have as many regular breaks as we can throughout the day. Followed by our third and final session C, looking at affective or emotional misconceptions of the mind. I'll start by talking a bit about why positive emotions aren't all positive, reviewing some research conducted in my lab at the University of Colorado Boulder. Continuing the theme of positive emotions and some misconceptions about them is Dr. Iris Mouse from UC Berkeley on why pursuing happiness can make us unhappy. And concluding with our final speaker, Dr. Amy Cuddy from the Harvard Business School, on how feeling powerless is not being powerless. We'll have a closing discussion after for invited conference participants at the end, really discussing some current issues that we brought up at the beginning of our remarks today, but we hope to spark a broader conversation. These issues confronting academic women, young parents, and really try to have a generative discussion about how we can begin to make some prospective steps forward and potentially some tractable progress as we move ahead. We just want to conclude by thanking all of our sponsors, as well as several key individuals whose names you can see here, who really helped make and play a critical role for this event to be here and to happen today. So thank you, everyone. And of course, thanks to our partners and husbands who are participating in the music class with our own children as we speak right now, which is no small part of why we're able to be here today and make this happen. So we want to thank you guys all for coming today, and we look forward to a really exciting set of talks and discussion ahead.